What happens when royal privilege collides with daytime television reality? Well, you're about to find out as we dive into one of the most explosive celebrity meltdowns ever caught on camera. This is the story of how Prince Harry completely lost his composure on live television and got himself kicked off one of America's most beloved talk shows. If you want to see how entitled behavior can destroy a career in just 20 minutes, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity accountability. The View studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy when Prince Harry walked in that Tuesday morning. Fresh off his latest media tour promoting his new documentary series, he had agreed to what was supposed to be a friendly interview with Whoopi Goldberg. The producers had briefed both parties on the talking points, standard fare about his charity work, his life in California, and his upcoming projects. What nobody expected was the powder keg that was about to explode. Whoopi had been hosting The View for over a decade and had interviewed everyone from presidents to pop stars. She prided herself on asking tough questions while maintaining professionalism, but she also had zero tolerance for disrespect. As Harry settled into the guest chair, adjusting his microphone with the kind of casual arrogance that only comes from a lifetime of having everything done for you, Whoopi noticed something in his demeanor that immediately put her on edge. "So, Harry," Whoopi began with her trademark warm smile, "let's talk about your new documentary series. You've been very vocal about wanting to tell your own story, but some critics have pointed out inconsistencies between what you're saying now and what you said in previous interviews. How do you respond to those concerns?" Harry's face immediately darkened. He had clearly expected softball questions, not the kind of journalistic integrity that Whoopi was known for. "Well, Whoopi, I think that's a rather unfair characterization. The media has consistently twisted my words and taken things out of context. I'm simply trying to set the record straight about my own experiences." "I understand that," Whoopi replied calmly, "but when you make public statements, people are going to fact-check them. For instance, in your documentary, you claim that the palace completely cut off your security detail without warning, but palace sources have documentation showing that discussions about security arrangements went on for months. How do you explain that discrepancy?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Harry's jaw clenched visibly as he leaned forward in his chair, his voice taking on an edge that made the production assistants exchange worried glances. "Listen, I lived this experience. I was there. I think I know better than some anonymous palace sources what actually happened to me and my family." Whoopi maintained her professional composure, but anyone who knew her could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. "Of course you lived your experience, Harry, but when you make public claims, especially ones that contradict documented evidence, people have a right to ask questions. That's how journalism works." "Journalism?" Harry let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the studio. "Is that what we're calling this? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels more like an ambush. I came here expecting to have a conversation, not to be interrogated like I'm on trial." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was supposed to be a feel-good interview about charitable work and personal growth, not whatever this was turning into. Whoopi's co-hosts exchanged glances, unsure whether to jump in or let this play out. Harry, asking follow-up questions. "Isn't an ambush, it's good journalism," Whoopi said, her voice still controlled but with steel underneath. "When you put yourself in the public eye and make claims that affect other people's reputations, those claims are going to be scrutinized. That's just how it works." "Other people's reputations." Harry's voice rose noticeably. "What about my reputation? What about the decades of lies and smears that have been printed about me? Where was this journalistic integrity when I was being destroyed in the press?" "Harry, I think you're missing the point here," Whoopi interjected, but Harry was clearly not interested in listening anymore. "No, I think you're missing the point," he shot back, pointing his finger at her in a way that made everyone in the studio freeze. "You sit here in your comfortable chair, making millions of dollars talking about other people's lives, and you think you have the right to judge me? You think you understand what it's like to have your entire existence dissected by strangers?" The silence in the studio was deafening. Whoopi's eyebrows raised slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried a dangerous quiet that anyone familiar with her knew meant trouble. "Excuse me? Did you just point your finger at me and question my right to do my job?" Harry seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I'm questioning your approach. I'm questioning whether this is really about journalism or whether this is about creating drama for ratings. Creating drama for ratings? Whoopi's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the studio. Baby, you don't know me well enough to come into my house and talk to me like that. I've been doing this job since before you knew what a television camera was, and I've never needed to create drama to get ratings. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Harry's face was flushed red, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. Your house? This is a television studio, not your personal kingdom. Just because you've been here a long time doesn't mean you can treat guests however you want. That was the moment when everyone in the studio knew this interview was about to go completely off the rails. Whoopi's co-hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. The audience was dead silent, and the producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth that somehow managed to be more intimidating than any scowl. Oh, honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me. But since you brought it up, let's talk about treating people however you want. Let's talk about walking away from your family, your duties, and your country, then spending years publicly trashing the people who raised you, supported you, and loved you. Harry's face went from red to purple. How dare you? You don't know anything about my family situation. You don't know what I've been through, what my wife has been through. You have no right to sit there and judge decisions you know nothing about. I have every right to comment on things you've made public. Whoopi fired back, her voice growing stronger. You wrote a book about it. You did a documentary series about it. You've given dozens of interviews about it. You made it public, which means it's fair game for discussion. Fair game. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. My trauma is fair game. My family's private pain is fair game for your entertainment. The studio audience gasped audibly. This was unlike anything they had ever seen on The View. Security personnel near the edges of the set tensed, ready to intervene if things escalated further. Whoopi remained seated, but her posture had shifted. Gone was any pretense of the warm, welcoming host. This was Whoopi Goldberg, the veteran performer, the woman who had survived decades in Hollywood and wasn't about to be intimidated by anyone, royal or otherwise. Sit down, Harry, she said with the kind of authority that made grown men think twice about their life choices. Don't tell me what to do, Harry snapped, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. I'm not one of your employees. I'm not someone you can just order around. No, you're a guest on my show, Whoopi replied, her voice steady as granite. And guests who can't conduct themselves with basic respect don't get to stay. So I'll ask you one more time, sit down and let's have a civilized conversation, or you can leave. Harry's laugh was bitter and sharp. Civilized? You call this ambush civilized? You call attacking someone's personal family trauma civilized? This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that drove me out of England in the first place. Nobody attacked your trauma, Harry, Whoopi said, standing up now herself. At 5'5", she wasn't physically imposing, but her presence filled the entire studio. What I did was point out the contradiction between claiming you want privacy while simultaneously monetizing every detail of your private life. That's not an attack, that's an observation. Monetizing. Harry's voice rose to a near shout. You think I'm doing this for money? You think I wanted any of this? I was forced into this position by people who were supposed to protect me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Forced. Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. Baby, nobody forces someone to write a tell-all book. Nobody forces someone to do a Netflix documentary. Nobody forces someone to give interview after interview rehashing the same complaints. Those are choices, Harry. Adult choices. The audience was completely silent now, afraid to even breathe. Too loudly. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable television. This was a full-blown public meltdown happening in real time. Harry began pacing behind his chair like a caged animal, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke. Choices? You want to talk about choices? Let's talk about the choice to protect a system that destroys people. Let's talk about the choice to prioritize an institution over human beings. Let's talk about the choice to stay silent while people you love are being destroyed by racism and hatred. And let's talk about the choice to handle those problems privately instead of turning them into a public spectacle. Whoopi shot back, without missing a beat. Let's talk about the choice to work within your family to solve problems instead of running to the media every time things get difficult. Harry stopped pacing and whirled around to face her, his face contorted with rage. Work within the family? Are you insane? I tried that for years. Years of being told to keep quiet, to take it, to smile and wave while my wife was being torn apart by the press, while my mental health was crumbling, while we were being hung out to dry by the very people who were supposed to have our backs. So your solution was to hang them out to dry instead? Whoopi's voice was getting louder now, matching his energy. Your solution was to air every piece of dirty laundry you could think of on international television? Your solution was to make accusations you couldn't prove and destroy relationships that took decades to build. I told the truth. Harry screamed, his voice echoing off the studio walls. I told my truth, and I'm sorry if that makes people uncomfortable, but I'm done protecting people who never protected me. Your truth. Whoopi's voice dripped with skepticism. Whose truth? Because your truth seems to change depending on which interview you're giving and how much money is on the table. Your truth about your father changes. Your truth about your brother changes. Your truth about your stepmother changes. Which truth are we supposed to believe, Harry? That hit home. Harry's face went white, then red again, his hands shaking with rage. How dare you question my integrity? How dare you sit there and act like you know better than I do what happened in my own life? I'm not questioning what happened in your life, Whoopi replied, her voice now dangerously calm. I'm questioning your version of what happened in your life, because your version keeps changing, and frankly, it doesn't always add up. Doesn't add up? Harry was practically vibrating with fury now. What doesn't add up is how someone like you, someone who should understand what it's like to be marginalized, what it's like to face discrimination, can sit there and defend a system that's built on exclusion and prejudice. Whoopi's eyes narrowed to slits. Someone like me? What exactly do you mean by someone like me, Harry? The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Harry had just walked into territory that even his privileged upbringing should have taught him to avoid. But instead of backing down, instead of recognizing the massive mistake he had just made, he doubled down. Someone who's faced real discrimination, real hardship. Someone who should understand what it's like to be an outsider. But instead, you're here defending the establishment, defending people who would never accept you as an equal. The silence that followed was so complete, it was almost suffocating. Whoopi stared at Harry for what felt like an eternity, her face completely unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. Let me make sure I understand you correctly. You, a man who was born into unimaginable wealth and privilege, who has never wanted for anything in his entire life, who has had every door opened for him simply because of who his grandmother was, you think you can lecture me about discrimination? You think you can tell me about being an outsider? Harry seemed to finally realize he had gone too far, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. I didn't mean it like that. I meant that you should understand the importance of speaking truth, to power, of standing up against systems that oppress people. No, you meant exactly what you said, Whoopi replied, standing up to her full height. You meant that someone like me, someone who actually fought for everything she has, someone who actually faced real discrimination and real hardship, should be grateful enough to the system to defend your right to trash your family on international television. Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time since the interview began, he seemed to be at a loss for words. But Whoopi wasn't done. Let me tell you something, Prince Harry, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I've been fighting for respect and recognition since before you were born. I've faced discrimination you can't even imagine. I've been told I wasn't good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, talented enough more times than you've probably been told no in your entire privileged life. And you know what I never did? I never blamed my family for the world's problems. I never turned my back on the people who loved me because things got difficult. Harry found his voice again, but it came out as a weak croak. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. The constant scrutiny? Whoopi let out a laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. Baby, I've been under constant scrutiny for 30 years. The difference is, I earned my scrutiny. I worked for it. I built something worth scrutinizing. You were born into it. And instead of honoring it, instead of using it to make the world better, You turned it into a weapon against your own family. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Harry's complete humiliation. His face was now pale except for two bright red spots on his cheeks, and his hands were trembling with a combination of rage and embarrassment. The entitled prince who had walked into the studio 20 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by a man who was quickly realizing that his royal status meant nothing in this room. "I think," Harry said, his voice shaking, "I think this interview is over." Whoopi smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Oh no, honey. This interview is over when I say it's over. You came into my house, disrespected me, questioned my professionalism, and made assumptions about who I am and what I should think based on nothing but your own arrogance. We're not done here." Harry's face cycled through several shades of red as he processed what Whoopi had just said. The realization that he wasn't going to be able to simply walk away from this disaster was clearly hitting him, and his reaction was everything you'd expect from someone who had never been told no in his entire life. "You can't keep me here," he said, his voice taking on a petulant tone that made him sound like a teenager having a tantrum. "I'm not your prisoner. This is still America, and I have the right to leave whenever I want." Whoopi crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was a particularly interesting specimen in a zoo. "Of course you can leave, Harry. The door's right there. But if you walk out of here right now, after the way you've behaved, after the things you've said, that footage is going to follow you for the rest of your life. Every time someone mentions your name, they're going to remember the day you completely lost your mind on The View." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Harry's eyes darted toward the cameras, seeming to remember for the first time that every moment of his breakdown was being recorded for posterity. His breathing became more rapid, and you could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out how to salvage this situation. "You're threatening me," he said, his voice cracking. "You're threatening to use this footage to destroy my reputation." "I'm not threatening anything," Whoopi replied calmly. "I'm simply pointing out the reality of the situation you've created for yourself. You came on live television and showed the world exactly who you really are. That's not my fault, that's yours." Harry began pacing again, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that made him look completely unhinged. "This is insane. This whole thing is insane. You've twisted everything I've said, taken everything out of context, made me look like the villain when all I've done is try to tell my truth." "Your truth again," Whoopi said with a shake of her head. "Harry, the only person who's made you look like a villain is you. I asked you legitimate questions about your public statements, and you responded by attacking me personally, questioning my professionalism, and making assumptions about my background and my beliefs. All of that is on you. I didn't attack you." Harry protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he seemed to realize how weak that defense sounded. "You pointed your finger at me and questioned my right to do my job," Whoopi reminded him. "You suggested that I don't understand discrimination. You implied that I should be grateful to defend your behavior because of my race. If that's not an attack, what would you call it?" Harry's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "I never said anything about your race. Don't put words in my mouth. You said someone like me should understand discrimination." Whoopi fired back immediately. "What did you mean by someone like me, Harry? What exactly did you think we had in common that should make me sympathetic to your cause?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Harry knew he was trapped, knew that any answer he gave would only make things worse, but his pride wouldn't let him admit his mistake. Instead, he did what entitled people do when they're cornered. He lashed out. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, throwing his hands up in the air. "I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by someone who's never had to deal with the kind of pressure I've faced my entire life. You've never had to live up to impossible expectations, never had to watch your family be torn apart by the media, never had to make the kind of impossible choices I've had to make." Whoopi's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Never had to deal with pressure? Never had impossible expectations? Honey, you really don't know who you're talking to, do you? I've been dealing with pressure and impossible expectations since I was old. Enough to understand that the world didn't want me to succeed. The difference is, I dealt with it without throwing my family under the bus. My family threw me under the bus first." Harry shot back, his voice reaching a fever pitch. "They hung me out to dry. They refused to protect my wife. They chose their precious institution over their own flesh and blood. So forgive me if I don't feel guilty about finally standing up for myself. Standing up for yourself by tearing them down. Whoopi's voice was incredulous. That's not standing up for yourself, Harry. That's revenge. And the fact that you can't see the difference is exactly the problem. Harry stopped pacing and whirled around to face her, his face twisted with rage. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what it's like to be trapped in a system that values tradition over human dignity, that prioritizes reputation over truth, that will sacrifice anyone to protect itself. I know exactly what that's like, Whoopi said quietly, her voice cutting through his shouting like a knife. The difference is, I fought to change the system from the inside. I didn't run away and spend years trying to destroy it from the outside. Change it from the inside. Harry's laugh was hysterical. How's that working out? How much has really changed? The system is still the same, still protecting the same people, still crushing anyone who threatens it. And your way is better. Whoopi challenged. Burning bridges, destroying relationships, airing dirty laundry for money? What exactly has that accomplished except making you rich and making your family miserable? That seemed to hit a nerve. Harry's face crumpled for a moment before hardening again. At least I'm not pretending everything is fine when it's not. At least I'm not enabling a system that destroys people. No, you're just destroying people yourself, Whoopi said with devastating simplicity. Your father, your brother, your stepmother, anyone who doesn't agree with your version of events. You've become exactly what you claim to hate. The words hit Harry like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face going white, his hands shaking uncontrollably. For a moment, it looked like he might actually faint. But then, instead of accepting the truth of what she'd said, instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he did what he'd been doing for years. He blamed everyone else. This is all your fault, he said, his voice breaking. You did this. You turned what should have been a simple interview into an interrogation. You attacked me. You humiliated me. You made me look like a fool on national television. Whoopi stared at him for a long moment, her expression a mixture of pity and disgust. Harry, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I didn't make you do anything. I didn't make you lose your temper. I didn't make you attack me personally. I didn't make you say the things you've said. All I did was ask you questions about your own public statements, and you couldn't handle it. That's not my fault. That's yours. Harry's response was to do something that shocked everyone in the studio. He picked up his chair and threw it across the set. The crash was deafening, and the audience gasped in horror. Security immediately moved toward the stage, but Whoopi held up a hand to stop them. That's enough, she said, her voice deadly calm. Harry, you need to leave. Now. I'm not going anywhere until you apologize, Harry said, his voice shaking. With rage. You've humiliated me. You've attacked me. You've made me look like a monster, and I want an apology. Whoopi looked at him with something approaching pity. An apology? For what? For doing my job? For asking you questions you didn't want to answer? For refusing to let you control the narrative? Harry, the only person who owes anyone an apology. Here is you, and we both know that's never going to happen. Harry's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: rage, desperation, and finally, something that might have been recognition of his complete defeat. But instead of gracefully accepting it, he made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Fine, he said, straightening his jacket with shaking hands. Fine, but when this airs, when people see how you treated me, when they see how you attacked a guest on your own show, you're going to be the one who looks bad. You're going to be the one who gets canceled. Whoopi smiled, and this time it was genuine. Oh, honey, I've been through worse storms than you could ever imagine. I've survived things that would break someone like you in half. You really think a tantrum from a spoiled prince is going to be what takes me down? The security guards finally moved in, not to arrest Harry, but to escort him out. As they approached, Harry seemed to realize that his royal status wasn't going to save him here, that his titles and his birthright meant nothing in this moment. He was just a man who had completely lost control of himself on national television. This isn't over, he said as the guards took his arms. This isn't over. Whoopi sat back down in her chair, smoothing her dress and adjusting her microphone as if nothing had happened. Yes, it is, she said simply. It's been over since the moment you decided to disrespect me in my own house. As Harry was led off the stage, still shouting about lawsuits and revenge and how he'd been treated unfairly, Whoopi turned to the camera with perfect composure. "Well," she said with a slight smile, "that was certainly something. We'll be right back after this commercial break." The cameras stopped rolling, but the damage was done. In the span of 30 minutes, Prince Harry had managed to destroy whatever remained of his reputation and prove to the world that underneath all the talk of service and compassion, he was just another entitled rich kid who couldn't handle being told no. The footage would indeed follow him for the rest of his life, but not in the way he had threatened. It would follow him as proof that when you strip away the titles and the privilege, some people have nothing left but their worst impulses. And that's exactly what happened when Prince Harry thought he could walk into Whoopi Goldberg's house and run the show. Sometimes the most powerful lesson someone can learn is that they're not as important as they think they are. Make sure you subscribe if you want to see more celebrity meltdowns like this, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Harry will ever learn from this humiliation? Or is he destined to keep making the same mistakes over and over again?